was 7 years old when I first got the talk. Now, I'm not talking about the stranger danger talk, and I'm certainly not referring to the puberty talk. I was a bit too young for that one. I was only 7 years old when I first received the race talk. Now, it happened about a decade ago, on Wednesday, the 13th of February 2013, and my primary school had a special Ash Wednesday Mass in our big, peaceful church. And as I lined up with my friends to receive a black cross on my forehead, and I walked back to my seat, instantly all eyes fell on me. From in front and behind and side to side, I could hear the laughter and whispers echo in my ears. Leensaa is so dark, you can't see her cross. Oh my goodness, she is so black. And it was in that moment that I realized just how different I was. And as I went home, really upset, and I told my parents what had happened, they first listened to my story. And they learnt how at even a young age, you can feel like an outsider. And then they led by example and took action. They spoke to my teacher, who then spoke to my class because at the end of the day, they just didn't really know what they were talking about. And they came and apologized to me. And this is how I got the race talk. And my parents told me about the inherent racism that I would have to navigate through daily. And by the end of the talk, I laughed. I genuinely couldn't believe that there are people in this beautiful world of ours that are capable of discriminating against another human being simply due to the color of their skin, simply due to the tone of their darkness. But 7-year-old me didn't want to accept this because I thought anything was possible. We all did when we were 7 years old. I thought I could change the world. Now, call me crazy, but here I am before you, 17 years old, and I still believe that I can. Now, I was born and raised here in Australia, and both my parents are immigrants from Ethiopia. And we've always thought of Australia to be a beautiful multicultural place, where people from different backgrounds and cultures can come together to coexist. Currently, 30% of our population was born overseas, and a further 50% have parents who were also born overseas. And we celebrate this diversity on days like March 21st, Harmony Day. But do you know what the International Day of Elimination of Racial Discrimination is? The United Nations established this day in response to the 1960 Sharpeville massacre. This occurred in South Africa, where a peaceful protest concerning black rights tragically resulted in 69 innocent civilians being brutally murdered by police and a further 180 wounded. This atrocity sparked international outrage and prompted the UN to declare March 21st as internationally recognized day to combat racial discrimination. However, here in Australia, the 1999 Howard government decided to replace this significant day with a more palatable version known as Harmony Day. As Howard states, "I do not accept that this country is racist." Now, this is unacceptable because it is decisions like this that play a role in the ongoing racial injustices that happen here in Australia. So we need to be able to move past this culture of silence that we have, because racism does happen. Now, you may have never experienced racism, which I understand, and some of you may have never felt the pain of being reduced and degraded to the color of your skin, the tone of your darkness. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Currently, 2/3 of non-white Australians experience racism in schools. Can you imagine that impact on a child's self-esteem and mental health? And a further 76% of all Australians believe that we do have a significant racism issue. And this issue stems all the way back to the 1788 invasion of the First Nation people's land. And currently, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been subject to a very unique experience of racism, with an astounding 97% of them having reported to experience racism often. Now, racism can also impact different communities in various ways. Like over the recent years here in Australia, we've seen incidents involving racism against South Asians, a rise in Islamophobia, an episodic criminalisation against African Australians, discrimination against Asian Australians during the COVID-19 pandemic, and even this year, during the failed Voice to Parliament, we saw an increase in racism towards our Indigenous people. But I know that all of us Aussies can move past this. I remember when I was just 10 years old, my family went on holiday to Melbourne. And that's until a man on the street approached us, started yelling at us, calling us the N-word, and telling us to go back to where we come from. Now, in that moment, I wanted to turn around and tell the man that he was wrong, that I was actually Australian. However, people always assume that I'm not. You see, racism can come in different forms. It's not always going to be overt and obvious. It can also be very discreet and subtle, like through the golden question I got asked when I was in Year 4. A relief teacher walked into the class, and before he even introduced himself, he decided to point right at me. It is almost as if a spotlight was cast upon my face, and everyone turned to stare. And that's when he asked me, "Where are you from?" I said, "Well, I was actually born here in Australia." "Really? Okay, where are your parents from?" Which he, of course, had to ask. And that's when I told him that they were from Ethiopia. "Wow, Ethiopia. I've never been there, but I have been to Kenya." I thought to myself, okay, that was really weird, but why wasn't me saying that I'm Australian enough for him? Am I not Australian because of the colour of my skin? Now, racism can also take the form of something called microaggressions. It's like when people assume that English isn't my first language, or people making racist jokes, which may initially seem innocent, but in reality can cut deep. And it's these forms that are more common here in Australia. Like, I remember just last year when I was at work serving a customer, and he asked, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" "Well, I would love to get into human rights, law, maybe even politics." "Politics? Really?" I nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I mean, hopefully one day I'll be able to work in our Parliament House." But politics is a dangerous game, especially for someone like you. "Someone like me," I replied, not knowing what was going to come next. Yes, I mean seriously, 25 years ago, I could have bought someone like you. Now, although we do live in an amazing multicultural country, we've got to come to realize that racism does happen. And although some aspects of it may be hard to combat, like the racial biases that are systematically ingrained in our society, or when we look at our role models, people in power, our government, and we realize that it is predominantly made up of old white men, we may start to lose hope. However, I know all of us Aussies can move past this. You see, racism is like a virus. If we don't address it, it continues to stay silent when it comes to this R word, then it will only grow and evolve and adapt and find new ways to infect our society, causing things like intergenerational trauma. And I know that all of us do not want to be having the race talk with our 7-year-old in the future. Picture this. Imagine in Australia where we're not just celebrating multiculturalism, but we're actively confronting racism. So our playgrounds are full of laughter and acceptance, our workplaces radiate the warmth of inclusion, and our communities can embrace genuine diversity with open arms. Imagine a society where every individual, regardless of their color, race, religion, culture, background, or overall appearance, can feel seen, heard, and valued. Imagine an Australia where our 7-year-olds can truly feel like they belong. Now, this vision is within our reach. It's not just a dream, it's our future. Now, you may be thinking, Leensaa, I love your enthusiasm, but how are we going to achieve this? Well, friends, aren't you all in luck? Because today I'm going to be giving each and every one of you a gift. This gift is a tool which I want us all to strive to use every single day, and share it with your friends, your colleagues, and your families at the dinner table tonight. It's something that my parents used on the 13th of February 2013. When they listened to my story, they learnt about me feeling like an outsider, and they led by example. I call it Leensaa's 3 L's: the listen, the learn, and the lead approach. First, listen. Listening is the first step towards change. We need to be able to listen to the voices of those who have been affected by racism and create safe spaces for these marginalized voices. I remember one time when I truly felt heard in a class discussion about racism. And after I shared one of my stories, a classmate of mine who had never experienced racism or thought of it to occur here in Australia came up to me afterwards and said, "I have no idea. Thank you for sharing your story." Now, it was this simple act of listening that made me feel heard and valued. It was a small but a significant step towards change. Second, learn. We need to be able to learn about our own racial biases and privileges, and learn about the history and current impacts of racism. As Nelson Mandela once said, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin. People must learn to hate, and if people can learn to hate, they can be taught to love." See, this is not just going to be a one-time task, but rather a lifelong commitment. Like learning about the history of racism here in Australia, like the White Australia policy, which institutionalized racism, or when you look at the stolen generations and how through government policies, Aboriginal children were stolen from their families. You can see how this plays a part in the ongoing struggles of Indigenous people today. And finally, we need to lead. Lead by example. You've got to be a leader and not just a bystander, which I know can be difficult sometimes. But if we all work together, we can call racism out. It's your job, your responsibility, and you all have a voice, so use it. Do not be silent. It's not good enough to be non-racist when I know all of us can be anti-racist. So I challenge you all, become an ally, become anti-racist, and let's all become leaders that don't need to depend on our people of color friends to call racism out. Like their color makes them the racist police, when we can all do it together. Use my 3 L's. Listen to the stories of those affected by racism, learn about your own biases and the history and impacts of racism, and finally, lead by example. So let's do it for the future generations, the 7, 17, and 27-year-olds to come. Let's make them feel like they truly belong and like they can be proud to be called Australian.